Hello, welcome to Teaching Economics Today 3, in which we look at classroom activities, planning lessons, and resources. My name is Gray Kruger, and I'm with the Academic Skills Center at SAOGI, and I'm very pleased to be presenting this video session, which will ideally give you a toolbox of activities to take with you in your teaching experiences and to help make your teaching sessions a bit more interactive. So, there are some instructions for you as you watch this video session. Please refer to the note-taking worksheet that you found attached to these slides. Write your answers to the questions, please, and be prepared to discuss in our small groups. Also, there will be a quiz on Teaching Today 1, 2, and 3, so that's another good reason to take detailed notes as you watch. As it's not really an interactive video, you might have questions that you want to ask me or things that you want to challenge, and that's good. So please take notes on any questions you have, and then we can raise those questions during our small group discussions to follow. Okay, so we've already looked at the value of good teaching, teaching today's students, and the differences that today's students represent for us as teachers. We've looked at teaching students, not lessons. And in session 2, you looked at different teaching strategies, in particular the value of student questions and teacher questions. In my session today, we're going to look at classroom activities, planning lessons, and resources. In particular, we're going to look at active learning. When we say active learning, we basically mean active events to engage students. And this picture basically captures what we mean by active learning. The students are active, they're not sitting down in rows of desks, there isn't the typical teacher at the front. In fact, this is the teacher over here acting as the guide on the side while the students get on with the learning. Of course, the teacher is not completely detached. She's listening carefully to what the students are doing, and she's probably offering feedback and providing direction when necessary. But this visual is in drastic contrast to the learning experience that I had, where you basically had a teacher at the front lecturing for 90 minutes and rows of passive students. So what we're trying to get to is a more active learning approach today. So we know that we don't have to be talking all the time in order to be delivering an effective lesson. This shouldn't really be a revolutionary concept because we've known for ages, indeed the Chinese knew as early as 300 BC that I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. So we've known for a long time that active learning results in a deeper learning experience for students. Yet, unfortunately, today we still see a lot of emphasis on lecture and teacher-centered instruction. So today's session will hopefully give you some tools to avoid a teacher-centered type learning situation and to make it more student-centered. So when we say active learning, we're also looking at ways to involve learners. This could be through guest speakers in your lectures, using mixed media, and importantly, it involves cooperative learning activities, encompassing discussions, experiments and role plays, interactive lectures, problem-solving tasks, and even something we call reciprocal learning, where you have students working in pairs, student A and student B, and student A perhaps takes notes for student B takes notes for student A, they exchange and compare, and there's a lot of discussion and learning that goes on in that type of atmosphere. So these are just examples of some of the things we're going to look at today. Before we start, however, why don't you take a moment to think about the learning structures used at your university, the one where you experienced your learning or where you're going to teach. Would you say the dynamic is more teacher-centered, rather more competitive, individualistic, or cooperative in terms of the learning type structure used? So can you think of examples of each of these? Well, regarding teacher-centered, this would basically encompass the typical teacher as the sage, the all-knowing provider of knowledge into the empty student's head sitting in the back, usually through lecture mode of instruction. A competitive type atmosphere might be one in which students' grades are posted publicly in the classroom and students can see where they stand in relation to their peers. An individualistic type learning structure might be one in which a student arrives to a large lecture hall with hundreds of students, sits down, takes notes from the lecture, and leaves, and without having any interaction with any colleagues throughout the entire semester. Then you have a cooperative learning type atmosphere where students are engaged in activities, working together. There's a high level of communication between students and teacher, students and students engaging with the actual content. So it would be interesting to hear in our small groups what sort of learning environment and structure you experienced and how you think that might impact your philosophy on teaching and education. So clearly cooperative learning has been proven and shown to be more effective in learning. In extensive meta-analyses across hundreds of studies, cooperative arrangements were found superior on a variety of outcome measures, generally showing higher achievement, higher level reasoning, more frequent generation of new ideas and solutions, and greater transfer of what is learned from one situation to another. So in essence, cooperative learning brings about a deeper learning experience, whereas teacher-centered type structure leads to a surface level education experience where you're basically teaching to the test. Notice here it says there is greater transfer of what is learned from one situation to another. And in fact, that's exactly what employers are looking for in graduates. So cooperative learning is helping to prepare students for the world of work, where they're expected to apply situations to certain situations to new situations, and they're expected to generate new ideas and solutions and bring a lot of creativity and innovation to the workplace. So that's another reason why cooperative learning is beneficial. What exactly is cooperative learning, you may ask? Well, it's much more than simple group work. Cooperative learning creates a positive interdependence while still requiring individual accountability. So interdependence meaning that the student is getting information from certain students. They still depend on certain students to complete certain tasks and to get ideas for learning. But ultimately, the student is individually accountable or responsible for their final work. An example of this might be in the context of writing a term paper. There may be peer editing starting at the ideal stage of writing, where a student produces a draft of their paper and gives it to colleagues in class for some feedback, and then incorporates that feedback in the final work. But ultimately, the author of that text remains responsible for all elements in the final work and receives the grade that the paper deserves. So in that sense, the student is still individually accountable, but gets a lot of feedback and advice and input from colleagues. So that basically encompasses these two aspects. Cooperative learning, of course, involves face-to-face interaction through group work. Examples could be giving explanations, discussing how well new knowledge relates to things learned earlier, discussing new concepts and how they may be applied. Cooperative learning develops interpersonal and small group social skills in addition. So in a cooperative learning environment, groups need to negotiate who is responsible for what elements of the tasks. Maybe you have a group leader at some point, you have a group recorder or note taker, you have a person responsible for generating questions, various roles that they can take. And students need to communicate efficiently in such a context and to solve any conflicts. Again, that's preparing students for the real world of work when they have to work in teams and with colleagues. In addition, cooperative learning skills should be analyzed by the students. An example is at the end of a longer task, students should consider what elements of their group work went well and what could they improve. And in this sense, they're developing their learning skills for future situations in which cooperative learning takes place. Many different activities can constitute cooperative learning. Think, Pair, Share is one of them. You've already learned about this in a previous session. Just to remind you, Think, Pair, Share involves the lecture stopping for a moment and students thinking about a deep concept, discussing with a pair, sharing ideas, and then coming back together to the whole class to discuss their thoughts. And this can be used at various stages throughout a lecture. Another aspect is note-taking pairs. This is an aspect of reciprocal learning that I mentioned earlier, where you have student A and student B, and they take notes for each other to make it a bit more interactive than simply an individual student taking his or her own notes. Another interesting idea is jigsaw exercises for more complex problems. This is where problems are divided into different parts, and basically you have group A, group B, and group C, and they're working on the different problems, and then they come together, basically like putting the pieces of a puzzle together as a complete whole. Jigsaw activities can also be very useful when using texts or different papers. Perhaps if you're exploring economic theory or a range of theories, Group A gets one paper to read and discuss and present, Group B another one, and Group C yet another, and then there's presentations and everything comes together. A very interesting and useful activity that requires very little planning from the teacher is the so-called send a problem activity, where a series of problem-solving rounds take place in the class. Students give their independently generated solution to other colleagues or other groups, and after a number of rounds, solutions are reviewed by the students and developed by their peers. So they give each other feedback, they maybe make corrections, and eventually the answers result in a final solution. But basically, you've got different exercises going around the class and students evaluating each other's work. This could be used effectively, for example, in understanding the impact of fiscal and monetary policy. I should stress here that cooperative learning activities can be implemented on a low-level scale. That means basically a simple, short, informal, maybe less than 15 minutes activity in class integrated into a lecture. Or there can be a more medium-level implementation where they take place over more class meetings, inside or out of class, so it can be even used online learning. And then there could be a high level of implementation where it's more formal, more complex, and it happens across a multitude of class meetings, perhaps across a whole semester. So there are various ways that you can implement cooperative learning to suit your needs and to suit the needs of the institution in which you're working. Many students tell me that, or many new teachers tell me they think that cooperative learning cannot be done in large classes. Well, this is definitely not the case, and the research shows this. For example, Carleton College found that 90 students in an introductory macroeconomics course practiced applying their knowledge of monetary and fiscal policy to specific economic scenarios. So during a multiple round of problem solving facilitated by the Send a Problem activity that I mentioned earlier, students identified how policy changes can be used in reaction to specific economic conditions or events, and they then evaluated these policy changes in terms of impacts on equilibrium conditions. So definitely they can be used in large classes if the teacher sets up and manages the class appropriately. And that brings me to the next point. Cooperative small group discussion or cooperative learning activities can be used in large classes, but there are some tips in order to manage the class. First, you need to stay on track. Make sure the students actually do what you told them to do and continue to do so during the time allotted. Secondly, make sure the students stay on time. So give them a time limit, tell them they have 5 or 10 minutes, and stick to that time limit. And thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, involve everyone in the group. Make sure there are no free riders. And in order to ensure that you involve everyone in the group, you probably need to walk around the classroom. Basically, we call this monitoring, where you walk around the classroom, you visit the different groups, and you make sure that the students are following the instructions, that they're equally participating. Maybe you need to stimulate them by providing some feedback, giving them some direction, instructing them, making sure that everybody's working together in the group. You might also consider nominating a student discussion leader from time to time, just to make it even more student-centered. When reporting at the end of a discussion, try to avoid repeating information that has already been mentioned. So ask questions like, does your group have something to add? Do you have a different idea? Try to get lots of ideas before adding your own commentary or analysis. I know when I was a new teacher, I always wanted to tell the students my opinion and what I think and to share my knowledge. But in fact, I learned that I need to hold back and let the students have their discussion. And I found that a lot of students can teach each other before I actually have to come in and clarify. So stimulate lots of discussion. And then, of course, at the end of the discussion, it is important for you as the teacher to summarize what has been discussed, summarize what has been learned, stress the key learning points that you want to get across, and provide overall closure to the discussion. It's good to know that cooperative learning and small group discussion also works in online learning too. Many of us may now find ourselves teaching online. So the same 3 rules that I mentioned earlier apply here, but there are some other tips. Here you need to start the discussion with questions that challenge the students' assumptions, that shape their perceptions, and that draw on students' experience. So take some time to really carefully craft the questions that you want the students to address in their discussions. Otherwise, if the questions are rather superficial or basic, yes/no questions, the students won't really be engaged, and the discussion may end rather early. Stay in the background, but keep students on track. So you're again acting as the guide on the side. Summarize at the end of the discussion, or better, ask the students to summarize. Involve everyone, but don't feel obliged to respond to every student all the time. That takes a lot of time, and students get bored with this. So try to vary your response throughout the semester. Sometimes you go to this student, in another lesson you'll go to that student. Make sure that somebody gets some of your attention at some point across the semester, but in a given discussion, don't feel obliged to respond to everything. In large classes, you might try breakout rooms, which is a feature in the Zoom platform, where students work in different breakout rooms, and then they come together and you can float around and monitor and participate in the discussion to the extent necessary. In an asynchronous discussion, that is, in a discussion that is happening offline, where students are posting their comments on a discussion thread or a discussion board, it's important that you limit the discussion posts to probably 200 words or so. If longer, then it will take too much time for you to read them and for the other students to read them and to respond. So this also encourages the students to learn how to express their ideas briefly and concisely, which is a very useful skill in academia and also in the world of work after studies. Experiments, role plays, debates, and games are also cooperative. Emerson and Taylor found significant gains in student learning in classes that used experiments compared to a control set of classes that did not. And Dixit finds that playing a few well-designed games in class and watching others play them brings to life the concepts of strategy, backward induction, and Nash equilibrium far better than any amount of formal statement or problem set drill that might take place in a typical lecture. So if you have time, I encourage you to click on the links here, where you can find a range of experiments, role plays, debates, and games that are specifically designed to help the students understand economic concepts. Of course, cooperative learning can involve case studies, and you may already have experience using case studies in your classes. And these are great because they provide real-life examples, and this is crucial for undergraduate students who may find economic concepts very abstract and very hard to understand. So providing case studies integrates economic theory with real-life examples and practice. Case studies also develop analytical and problem-solving skills and exploration of solutions, and allow students to try out new knowledge and skills. So you may be also wondering now, where am I going to find case studies? Because these are usually very, very intricately designed. Have no fear, because at the end of this session, I'm going to show you some resources that have these case studies already prepared for economics classes, and you can certainly use those, and they're basically ready to try out in your classrooms with maybe some small modifications as needed. At this point, I'd like to talk a little bit about what we call interactive lecture. And I just want to stress for you at this point that we're not suggesting at all that you should eliminate lecture. Definitely not. Lecture is here to stay. It has been here for ages, and it's certainly an efficient way to transfer knowledge to the students. But what we're encouraging you to do, and what we want you to do as a teaching fellow, is we want you to do something what we call interactive lecture, where you have a lecture and you're peppering the lecture, salt and pepper, you're peppering the lecture with certain cooperative learning and active learning activities. There are a number of easy activities that can help and make a lecture more interactive. One activity is called extended questions, whereby you plan for extended questions on key information that you have presented during the lecture. And these questions can then easily lead to a discussion. So it works by asking the class or telling the class, okay, ask me a question about this, whatever it is you've been discussing in the lecture. Then you ask, does everyone agree? Why not? And you get a nice rich discussion going. It's important that you predict in advance what questions the students might ask you. And if they don't ask you those good questions that you hope they ask, then you should be ready to ask those questions and discuss them with the class. Sometimes the students won't actually go where you want them to go, so be prepared. But generally this works very, very well to sort of check in and determine how well students have been following the lecture up to a certain point by telling them to ask you a question and then getting a discussion going. And it requires zero to no planning on the part of the teacher. You just simply have to prepare a few questions just in case they don't ask you. But otherwise, the students generate the questions themselves. Another aspect of interactive lecture involves discussion points. And this, again, is very simple. You just simply plan discussion points at different stages of your lecture, or you reserve some time at the end of the lecture to ask students to engage in discussion. So in these discussions, students can clarify, question, extend, apply, or challenge the information that has been presented so far in your lecture. Of course, reporting and feedback and any clarification is important to do at the end with teacher guidance. Try to pose the discussion points very clearly. Usually this is best done visually and orally, so you might have a presentation slide, a PowerPoint slide, showing exactly what discussion points you want the students to discuss, and also give the instructions orally. Tell the students in advance how much time they have to engage in the discussion, and then, of course, as usual, monitor the students, walk around the classroom and make sure that they are on track and doing what you've asked them to do. In addition, you can use tasks and different exercises to integrate into a lecture. These can involve solving, predicting, applying, deriving, or other tasks and activities you want. Have students report their results back, so there definitely needs to be a feedback stage so that you can determine how well they've participated and how well they've understood the material. Plan your instructions carefully. Make sure that you get your instructions right the first time, ideally, so you don't have to re-instruct, which takes a lot of unnecessary time. And set a reasonable time limit. Don't worry if some students aren't completely finished. If the majority are finished, you can go ahead and stop an activity. Maybe sometimes if it's a large group, you can clap your hands and say, please stop, and get the students' attention, and then go into a quick feedback and check to see how well students have performed on the tasks and exercises. Another really nice activity is called Challenge Your Partner. This is, again, extremely simple. You simply tell the students to come up with one or two very challenging questions based on the lecture content, and the objective is for the students to challenge their partner by asking these difficult questions. So it creates a healthy competitive spirit between the students. Basically, it can take roughly 10 minutes, and then you conclude by having a debrief, checking overall understanding, getting feedback. And the great thing about this activity is that you can collect all of the questions that the students have generated, and you can put these questions into an exam. So these are actually exam questions that the students themselves have generated, and this saves valuable teacher time in preparing exam or quiz questions. If you don't want to use them in an exam, you could simply use these questions in the next lesson at the beginning to review material that was covered in the previous lesson. Again, this requires zero to no planning on the part of a busy teacher like yourself. So here's your first very useful resource for cooperative learning in economics. Please be sure to go to the Starting Point website here and have a look at some of the cooperative learning activities that might be useful in your classroom. Be ready to share in our small group discussions what activity you found useful here. Of course, more active learning strategies also include using mixed media in your classroom, again, to pepper your lecture with some of these media techniques. Of course, you can use magazines like The Economist or newspapers, current events, to bring some economic concepts to life. YouTube videos work very well. You may have experience with this already. If you click on here, you can see a very short presentation by Mariana Mazzucato, economist, I found very interesting, just to give you an idea of what you could show students. The Freakonomics radio website has become extremely popular, particularly among undergraduate students who find some abstract economic concepts difficult to relate to the real world. Well, this has useful examples all over the place that you could integrate into your lesson too. The Khan Academy has a whole area dedicated to economics and finance. And of course, there's Mentimeter and Kahoot that are useful for polling students or setting up quizzes that you might want to integrate into the lesson. And we'll have a whole session dedicated to showing you how to use this type of media later in the course. Levitt and Dubner's hit Freakonomics, as I mentioned earlier, is extremely popular. Also, certain books and websites, The Economic Naturalist is great because they show why economics explains almost everything. Again, this is really useful for undergraduate students who may need help in relating economic theory and abstract concepts to real-world situations. And also, Discover Your Inner Economics provides a humorous way to bring economics to life. If you click again on these pictures, it will take you directly to the website so you can explore what they have to offer. You may be familiar with this scene in the movie A Beautiful Mind. This is the relatively famous bar scene in which Professor John Nash comes to this conclusion of Nash equilibrium. But in fact, it might be good to show this short clip to students to show how the movie got it wrong, actually, and might be a nice way for you to initiate a lesson on Nash equilibrium. But I showed you this to illustrate that film and video resources can be a very engaging way to illustrate certain economic concepts. Carrasco Galejo, in his paper in 2017, has a whole list of short film clips, maybe 2 to 5 minutes long, as a way to illustrate different economic concepts such as taxes, oligopoly, externalities. So I encourage you to dig up this paper and have a look at some of the suggestions he has. In addition, there are a couple of websites here that also have ideas for using short film clips. I would advise you to use short clips of films in your lectures. If they're longer than 5 minutes or so, students can lose interest and focus and get a bit distracted, and they might find it boring. So keep it relatively short and focused. You may be familiar also with certain podcasts. This is audioecon.com, which has a wide range of podcasts on economic topics. You can set this for homework, or you can do it in class, but it works quite well for homework because students listen to it at home, maybe with some specific questions that you have set with the listening task, and then you bring the students to the lesson the next day or the next session, and they can engage more in discussion based on what they listen to. Try technological teaching tools. There are various platforms and applications available. I mentioned 2 of them earlier, Mentimeter and Kahoot. And there are so many of them that we actually have our own dedicated input on interactive teaching tools, which will take place on Monday at 10 o'clock via Zoom. So be sure to be there so you can learn about some of these interactive teaching tools here. What about guest speakers? Can we bring guest speakers to our class? Of course, it's actually easier than you might think to find guest speakers. You can invite fellow professors, graduate students, or researchers within your institution, or people from outside the institution in the business community or NGO area, and they can come in and talk about what's interesting, exciting, or useful about their work. Again, this helps bridge economic theory to real life. It also helps the students see a new face other than the teachers. They can get excited by seeing somebody new and can stimulate discussion and questions. It's important to remember that students remember information that relates to ideas or experiences that they are already familiar with. So you should capitalize on this by using examples from sports, student life, current events, popular culture. And even better, ask the students to generate their own examples from personal experience in class discussions, presentations, or as a written assignment. Fizzle has a very good paper here on a presentation-based course in sports economics, in which it was a whole semester on sports economics, but where the students themselves did their own research on sports and then presented the economic connection to sports throughout the semester. So it was a very student-centered way of engaging students with the content. Be sure to create context for your students also in your lessons. So tell students how new information relates to previous and future lectures in your course and what it means to the overall study program. So make sure students see the bigger picture of everything you're doing so that they see the links. Create activities or assignments that ask students to fit new information into the overall themes of the course. For example, you could have students compare two ideas or maybe synthesize competing perspectives, or discuss the evolution of one theory over another. Show students how specific skills can be applied to real-world problems. All of these strategies that I've been discussing with you make it more likely that students will remember the information from the lecture, because students will integrate the material into already existing knowledge, structures, and experiences. Now, at this point, you might be wondering, how are you going to get your students to participate in these active and cooperative learning activities? Some teachers tell me that their students don't like doing activities or they prefer to be passive. Well, it's definitely true that some students do prefer to work alone and they prefer to just come to the lecture, take notes, leave, and do the test. But there are some tips that I'd like to give you for incorporating active learning into your lectures and to avoid student resistance to some of these techniques. The first is to set your expectations early. That is, on the first day of the course. Tell the students that they should expect to engage with the material in a variety of ways, including active and cooperative learning. And you might consider making participation in your classes part of the grade as a way of providing extrinsic motivation for your students to participate. Integrating activities into lectures or changing things up in your lecture about every 15 to 20 minutes works very well because, as we learned already, students' attention tends to drop after that amount of time. And I would stress that variety is the key. Students like and respond to a range of activities, so lessons are less predictable, and this tends to improve learning overall. Be sure to tell students your rules for participation in activities and discussions. And this usually refers to making sure students respect other students' ideas and points of view and show understanding and respect, even though they respectfully disagree. Also explain the rationale for active learning. Tell students why active learning is useful and how activities relate to learning objectives and the real world. For example, you can tell them how active learning is part of teamwork that is useful in the workplace after they graduate. This may help to counter any student resistance to active learning techniques. And finally, give yourself and give your students time to get used to active learning. This may be new to them. They may be used to simply a chalk and talk approach where the teacher lectures all of the time. So they might be a bit shocked by active learning. So introduce it gradually. Give yourself time to experiment and take some risks, and give your students time to become familiar with these techniques. Now I'd like to talk about some new approaches in economics teaching. First, briefly, I'll discuss service learning, and then more extensively, I'll talk about flipped classrooms. So service learning combines academic study with community service outside of the university. Students take real-world issues into account and think and behave as real economists with the aim of benefiting the communities in which they live. So, for example, service learning might include the class working with a local hospital that needs help with financing, or maybe an organization needs help with a survey of the community. So students could actually carry out a survey and find out how well the organization is providing outreach services. Or maybe for an NGO or other charity organization in the community, or with a real business. And at the end of the service learning experience, students integrate the theory that you're providing in the classroom, and they might produce a report that they deliver to the hospital or to the NGO or to the organization. And this way, this is really great because students are involved in active learning, integrating theory with practice. And at the end of the course, they actually have a deliverable, a report that they deliver to a client, as it were. And students can actually write this information in their curriculum vitae or their resumes when they go looking for jobs afterwards, because they have something concrete, something tangible that they've actually produced for a potential employer. So this helps students actually prepare for the world of work after. So service learning combines academic material in class, so the economics, the theory. It involves relevant service in the community to a various organization, and then reflection on the learning through the production of a report or some sort of output where students apply the learning. If you want more information about service learning, visit this website, Pedagogy in Action, through Carleton College, because they have a lot of useful ideas for how service learning works. Of course, it may be difficult to implement in practice because we're all busy teachers, but I wanted you to understand that this is a growing area of economics education in which there's relevant service to the community interacting with theory in the classroom. If you want to engage in service learning, I would advise you to make sure that this is acceptable for your institution, because they may have rules and there may be certain regulations you have to follow, but it's something that I definitely encourage you to research further on if you're interested. Very important for us to discuss is inverted classrooms, or so-called flipped classrooms, where we flip learning. This works by students working on tasks outside of class, individually or in pairs or in teams. Students then present their work in class, asking questions, evaluating, or discussing. And then students follow up with more tasks, building on knowledge and skills to prepare for the next class. Let me explain flipped learning in more detail. Essentially, flipping the classroom means that students gain their first exposure to new material outside of the class, usually via reading or watching lecture videos. And then they use class time to do the harder work of assimilating that knowledge through problem-solving discussions or debate. So this visual illustrates it nicely. Here you have the traditional classroom where you have students in class watching a lecture rather passively, and then they go home and do the homework activities by themselves. In the flipped classroom, however, students are watching the lecture online or doing reading at home by themselves, and then they come to class to engage in classroom activities. So in essence, this means that students are doing the lower levels of cognitive work, that is, gaining knowledge and comprehension outside of class, and they're focusing on the higher forms of cognitive work, that is, application, analysis, synthesis, and/or evaluation in class, where they actually have the support of their peers and the support of the instruction. The support of the instructor, of course. So a simple flipped classroom type might look like this. At home, students watch a video introducing a key economic concept. Before the class, they complete a quiz or an exercise task or a series of activities that you have given them in advance. And these tasks are related to the concepts that are on the video. And then students come to class and they present and discuss their understanding of the concept. Possibly they do individual or group tasks to apply what they watched or learned at home. And the teacher's role in the flipped classroom is then to float around and provide clarification, provide additional instruction, respond to questions, and clarify anything that may not have been clear from the self-study. There are numerous video resources on key economic concepts that you could have the students watch in their own time. And we would be very happy if you could share some especially good ones that you may know during our small group discussions. You can tell us some video clips that you think could be useful for the flipped classroom. So as a task on the handout, question 5 on your handout asks you to watch this short video by Andrew Wong from the University of Alberta. He's going to talk about how he incorporated flipped learning in the economics classroom. Please answer question 5 after you watch and be ready to discuss in our small groups. Of course, there are many other learning activities that can be useful in the economics classroom, and I know that you have many ideas that you've been exposed to. So we will talk more about these over the week, and I look forward to your sharing your ideas with us in our small group discussions. So we've spent a lot of time talking about classroom activities that you can use in your lessons. This now brings us to the last 2 points: planning lessons and resources, teaching resources. Let me say a few brief words about the importance of lesson planning and stress that no, it doesn't have to be like this poor teacher stressed over planning. But in the initial days of becoming a new teacher, it is important to spend some time planning, and even for experienced teachers, it's useful to dedicate some time to this so that you know where you're going with the course and the students can see an evolution of development in their learning. It's very easy, actually. It's as easy as ABC and 1, 2, 3. So please follow along with the handout that I gave you and take some notes on some easy tips for lesson planning. So the first thing, section A, I'd say you need to set specific and achievable learning objectives. So that is asking yourself these questions. What is the topic of the lesson? What do I want students to understand and be able to do at the end? And what do I want students to take away from this particular lesson? Notice the emphasis here on the word do. What do I want students to do? So this will get you thinking in terms of active learning. Under section B, you need to describe the learning outcome using verbs. It's very helpful to use verbs. And it's nice to phrase your lesson in terms of what the students will be able to do. Like this: upon completion of this module, upon completion of this lesson, students will be able to demonstrate their knowledge, demonstrate awareness, identify sources of reading texts, evaluate theoretical differences, undertake research, state reasoned arguments. So here you can see a range of verbs that are used, and you can see that the focus is on what the students will be able to do. So key competencies or abilities that they can demonstrate at the end of the lesson. So have a look at these aims. Which aims do you think are good or bad? Number 1, to teach a good lesson. Well, this is obviously a bad lesson aim. This is obviously describing what you're going to do as the teacher, but it says nothing about what the students are going to do. 2, students will demonstrate understanding of the general equilibrium model by doing XYZ, some activity. So this is, of course, far better because it says what the students will do. It expresses the activity in terms of a verb, and there's a clear action, what students will do by the end of the lesson. 3, students will be able to make economic application of equilibrium concepts in multi-stage games. Sounds quite good to me, saying what students will be able to do and in what context. Number 4, I will teach the students the basic elements of welfare economics. Well, again, this is very much like the first aim where it says what you're going to do. So it's describing your actions, but not what the students will do. So this one needs to be reworked in terms of student learning outcomes. Number 5 says students will demonstrate awareness of the basic role of uncertainty and imperfect information in analyzing economic incentives. Well, that sounds pretty good to me. Maybe we just need to find out how to measure these objectives. But otherwise they are phrased with, the ones that are phrased with a student outcome are far better. C, decide how you will measure the outcome. How will you measure each of these, for example? Students will demonstrate awareness of the basic role of uncertainty and imperfect information in analyzing economic incentives. How will you measure that? Or 2, students will be able to make economic application of equilibrium concepts in multi-stage games. So these are phrased rather well, but you need to consider how you would measure this. Of course, you would measure it in how well they perform the game and the feedback stage to the game. What input do you get from the students to demonstrate how well they've understood? Think about how you're going to measure the aims that you establish for your classes. So basically, in essence, a good objective is specific and student-centered, focused on student outcomes. It's achievable. Students should be able to do it. It's at their level. It challenges them, but it's still manageable. And of course, the objective is measurable. We can measure the outcome somehow. Planning a lesson in 3 easy steps, as easy as 1, 2, 3. So when I'm going to plan a given lesson in, let's say, 1 hour, 90 minutes, 45 minutes, whatever, I first need to think about how I'm going to develop the introduction. What will I do to introduce the topic? How will I check what students already know? And how will I establish the context or the relevance? Of course, I need to grab their attention too. Regarding establishing the relevance and context, I need to make sure students understand how this particular lesson fits in with the overall course of study and with the real-world application. Again, especially undergraduate students need to see how what I'm learning today relates to the real world of economics. So I'm thinking about this lesson, I'm thinking about the overall course of study, and I'm thinking about the real-world application of what this lesson is offering. Furthermore, I need to get the students' attention. There are many ways to do this. Surprising facts, pictures can work very well. Using a short video clip, as we've discussed earlier, can be a good way to introduce topics. Practical applications, of course, why not ask the students what they already know about the topic or issue? Get the students to tell you what they know before explaining and introducing yourself. This also helps you evaluate how much students know, and then you can make some small modifications later in your lesson. Students love personal anecdotes or stories from your own experience as well as others. Historical events can be extremely thought-provoking, different dilemmas, and of course real-world examples. Secondly, I need to plan the learning activities in the actual lesson. So what will I do to explain the topic? How can I engage the students in the topic? And by engage, I mean maybe I'm asking the students questions, maybe I'm getting them involved in doing an activity. I need to get them interested and I need them focused on me. What are some relevant real-life examples, analogies, or situations that can help students understand the topic? What will students need to do to help them understand the topic better? Again, emphasis on the word do. So students are not going to be so passive as in the past, typical lecture style, but we're actually incorporating active and cooperative learning. And importantly, again, related to what I just said, how can I involve students throughout the lesson? So not just at the beginning, but at different stages throughout the lesson, because as we already learned, students' attention tends to drop after about 20 minutes. So I need to have in my mind ideas to involve them throughout the whole lesson. Take care not to overload the system. Consider how quickly students can process information. Short-term memory requires time to process the sensory input we receive. And students certainly are not sponges. They cannot immediately absorb new information. And therefore, it's good to consider how much are we giving them? How much information are we expecting students to process? It can be a very good idea to plan short breaks throughout the lecture so students can look at their notes, ask questions, maybe discuss with a partner who might know better or help them. This gives the lecturer, this gives you as the teacher an opportunity to assess student understanding and to adjust the remaining part of the lecture as needed. You can also include a more formal activity after 15 or 20 minutes, as I've told you. For example, students can summarize or paraphrase the last few important points that you mentioned in the lecture. They can either do this by writing notes or by discussing with the person sitting next to them. You can then review the points and move on to the next phase in the lecture. But essentially, by taking these short breaks after every 15 or 20 minutes and doing something different, you're checking in with the students and you're essentially evaluating how well the students are learning. And at the same time, the students benefit by taking a break, doing something different, energizing the brain somehow. Giving students and yourself a break has another advantage. Students' attention drops. So students remember most of the information in the first 10 minutes, but they remember very little from the middle part of the lecture. So a short break will revitalize their attention. Students will be more likely to remember information. Sometimes we call this brain oxygenation. Get them to put some oxygen into the brain, which should stimulate learning and make it more memorable. Here's a nice diagram to illustrate how you might break up a lecture into different parts with engaging moments. So of course you have your introduction here. Then you might have 12 to 20 minutes of lecture. This is volume 1. Then it's time for action. Get the students doing something for maybe 3 to 10 minutes using some of the cooperative techniques I've told you earlier. Then you might go back into doing lecture again for 20 minutes or so. Then again, it's time for action because you can see students' attention dropping. Then you go back to lecture, and then at the end, be sure to allocate enough time for a 5 or 6 minute summary. And summary can either be teacher-centered or student-centered. And this brings us to summarizing and concluding the lesson. So you can always state the main points yourself by saying, today we talked about. But even better is, of course, ask the students to summarize the main points of the lesson. This could be done in many ways we've shown you, like a 5-minute paper, 1-minute paper, or a discussion or a quiz. There are many ways. Ask students, what are the most important things you learned in this class? This is also an opportunity for you to preview the next lesson and ask, how does this topic relate to the next one, and prepare students for what's to come. So that basically covers lesson planning in a nutshell. Now the most important part, perhaps, or the most useful part, resources. I promised that we would share some really useful teaching resources for you so that you can easily implement active learning into your lectures and into your teaching. So the first resource I'd like to show you is called Coricon. Coricon was designed by this woman. This is Dr. Wendy Carlin from University of College London. And she designed this with a number of colleagues in economics and also in close cooperation with students and researchers in various universities throughout the UK, throughout the United States, and now it's expanding to the entire world. And basically, Coricon has a wide range of useful videos for teaching economics concepts with real-world application. They have several books that have been translated into these languages, and this is already old, so I think they've even implemented some new languages into their portfolio. If you're interested in learning more, click on this video. Dr. Wendy Carlin provides a short discussion of the idea behind Coricon, and if you click on the logo here, you can enter the website and have a look at everything they have to offer. It might require that you register, but registering also brings you benefits that you receive some useful updates for teachers and also interesting ideas in the discipline of economics generally. In fact, at the moment, they have a growing resource on COVID-19, coronavirus implications related to economics that you might find interesting and that you can also use in your teaching. As I said, Coricon has several key course books. The core course book is called The Economy, and this is available in electronic format for free, I believe. And they've also come out with the Economy, Society, and Public Policy, and they have another one called Doing Economics, which contains empirical projects. So these resources could be extremely useful to supplement your course or to provide inspiration for ideas you want to use in your classroom. Another excellent resource is by Julian Picoult of the University of British Columbia, Canada. I highly recommend that you visit this website. In fact, it's required that you visit this website. Question 6 on your handout asks you to look at this website and another one in my slide set and to find some useful activities that could easily be employed in your classroom. This particular website has a wide range of cooperative learning activities across all areas of economics, so I highly recommend it. In essence, everything that we've presented to you in this particular session and across the 3 Teaching Economics Today sessions has been based on this key text that influenced our work greatly by Becker, Watts, and Becker, Teaching Economics, More Alternatives to Chalk and Talk. They basically responded to the fact that students were complaining that there was way too much lecture and chalk and talk in today's economics teaching, and they demanded more interactivity. So these professors of economics have responded to this need by providing this great book. And as I promised, at the end of the course, I will provide you with a resource booklet that includes our main sources as well as a wide range of economic-specific resources that you can find useful, all in one location. So to summarize, I'd like to stress that when your materials, your lesson plans, and your approach to your students show that you have taken the students into consideration, they are likely to forgive most glitches. So what is a glitch, you might ask? Well, a glitch is a little problem, little problems that happen when you're teaching. For example, when I delivered this slide presentation to you, sometimes I forgot what I was going to say, and this is a small glitch. Sometimes glitches can be minor, sometimes they can be more significant when you forget important things to bring to the classroom, or you forget information that you want to tell the students, or you don't know the answer to a question. These are things that happen to all teachers at all stages of their development. But when students know that you're taking a lot of care in the planning and delivery of your lessons and that you care about the students, they are likely to forgive most glitches, especially from new teachers. And here is our basic metric for successfully reaching first and second year students. Above all, we aim to communicate clearly for all of our students. This is in our instructions and in our explanations of economic concepts. We want to communicate clearly for everyone. We will generate interest for most students. We will motivate some students, and hopefully we will inspire a few students. But we can't really cater to everyone all of the time. We can cater to some of the people some of the time. And that's a reasonable goal for us to try to achieve. So now at this stage, please finish writing up your notes from this section and be ready to discuss the elements from Teaching Economics Today 1, 2, and 3 in our small groups. Please refer to the handouts for these sessions. There will be a graded quiz, so be ready for that and be ready to ask us questions and to engage in fruitful discussion in our small groups. Thank you so much for watching this short video. This concludes everything, and if you're interested, here are some of our resources that we use to inform our work from the discipline of economics education. See you in the small groups. Bye.